What if the world's next personal computer didn't sit on your desk? It sat on your face. Welcome to Unboxd Origins. I'm Howie, your resident science geek and accidental trivia sponge.
And I'm Wyatt. I ask the big questions. Sometimes philosophical, often skeptical, always curious.
Today, we're digging into how did Apple Vision Pro ignite the spatial computing era? Start at the beginning, and you hit a century of people trying to move screens off desks. The idea of wrapping computing around your head is older than Silicon Valley itself. From Ivan Sutherland's Sword of Damocles headset in the 1960s, a clunky, ceiling-hung prototype that mapped wireframe graphics into a viewer, to the military and industrial, head-mounted displays used for navigation and maintenance. The long arc includes the VR hobbyist boom of the 90s, Jaron Lanier's early VR companies, and a steady trickle of startups trying to make immersive headsets for gaming and enterprise. Each wave advanced the tech, displays, sensors, tracking, but none created a mainstream everyday market. They were either too heavy, too isolating, or simply too niche. Then you get a different kind of momentum in the 2010s. Smartphones change expectations, and AR becomes a software story as much as a hardware one. Apple's gradually picked at the problem, quietly buying teams and talent, experimenting with depth sensors, cameras, and machine learning. That slow accumulation matters. Micro OLED displays get small and bright enough, eye tracking and inside-out tracking get accurate enough, and systems on a chip get powerful and thermally efficient enough to let a headset feel responsive. Apple's work on silicon, an M2 chip, and a new R1 companion for sensor processing, and the integration of software and hardware are the invisible scaffolding that make a polished headset possible. This is the long, incremental rising action. Tech that was once exotic becoming engineering discipline. The tipping point was less about a single breakthrough and more about product-level choices. When Apple unveiled Vision Pro at WWDC, they didn't market it as a gaming gadget or a VR cave. They framed it as spatial computing, a way to place Windows, apps, and people into the physical world around you. Hardware choices supported that narrative. Ultra-high-resolution micro OLED displays, one for each eye, a suite of outward-facing cameras for pass-through, integrated spatial audio, and a novel input model relying on eyes, hands, and voice. On the software side, Vision OS rolled out as a true OS with developer tools and an App Store paradigm. Price and theatrical reveal aside, what flipped the script was Apple's insistence on making the headset feel like a natural extension of the phone-Mac ecosystem rather than a separate toy. Market reaction was predictable and explosive. The press and developer communities pivoted from "is VR dead?" to "okay, what's the app model?" Investors and content creators suddenly reevaluated the size of the runway for spatial apps. Companies that had shelved AR projects dusted them off. Game studios considered new control models. Productivity firms imagined virtual displays without physical monitors. Even industries that historically shied away from headsets, healthcare, architecture, education, started prototyping spatial workflows. Whether people bought one immediately or not, Apple had done something crucial. They signaled that spatial computing could be a serious platform deserving of app ecosystems, design languages, and long-term attention.
Aha! And here's the overlooked twist. It wasn't just the device that catalyzed the era. It was Apple's ability to translate a hodgepodge of technologies into a coherent developer story with economic promise. The Vision Pro didn't invent eye tracking or pass-through or spatial audio. Those existed. But Apple gave them a standard, an SDK, and a marketplace. Developers get APIs for anchors, depth, and spatial placement. Creators can ship spatial video and photos that persist. Most importantly, Apple folded spatial experiences into the habits of existing users. Continuity with iCloud, familiar media apps, FaceTime reimagined in 3 dimensions, which lowered the behavioral friction for trying something genuinely new. Think about the iPhone for a moment. The iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, but when Apple built a full stack, hardware, OS, developer tools, App Store economics. It turned a category into a platform. Vision Pro is playing the same bluff. And the bluff is effective because Apple's ability to marshal millions of existing developers and billions of users means that experimental features suddenly become viable businesses. That's the aha. The ignition is cultural and economic, not purely technological. Apple's stamp makes the market take a new category seriously. And that matters more than any single spec sheet.
Of course, there are practical choices in that ignition. Apple consciously aimed to make the Vision Pro less isolating than VR headsets. The pass-through camera system preserves your room as a stage, and the interface is spatial but not alien. Input is a dance of glances, gestures, and speech, intuitive metaphors that reduce the learning curve. The device pushes designers to think in meters and anchors, turning floating UIs and spatial audio into everyday interactions. And by targeting high-end users first with a premium price, Apple created a halo product that funds long-term platform development while letting early adopters generate the compelling content and workflows others will copy. That said, ignition doesn't mean instant ubiquity. Price, comfort, battery life, and privacy are real constraints. The public conversation turned quickly to questions about who owns spatial data, how advertisers might exploit gaze information, and whether wearing a screen on your face will be socially comfortable in restaurants and public transit. Apple has historically used privacy as a differentiator, and how they design defaults around data retention and on-device processing will shape public trust. But even with those challenges, the launch fundamentally rebooted both imagination and investment in the space. The kind of reboot that produces new startups, new research, and 100 R&D backrooms trying to push down costs or invent lighter form factors.
Aha! There's another dimension to the ignition that most summaries miss. The role of content and narrative in making a platform feel real. When Apple demoed FaceTime in a shared spatial room, or someone edited a movie in an enormous virtual studio, those moments weren't just PR. They were proofs of concept for new genres of human behavior. People can imagine the rest once they see a believable example. This is why the App Store matters. It's the storytelling machine. If creators can ship immersive experiences that feel like a natural evolution of things people already do, watching films, collaborating on documents, learning with a teacher, then adoption doesn't require convincing everyone that the hardware is magical. It just has to be clearly useful in ways that existing tools aren't. It's worth noting another nuance. Apple didn't aim for ubiquity on day one. It went for the platform starter pack approach. Build a premium product that sets expectations and gives developers a stable target. That's risky in a world where first mover sometimes means first to fail. But Apple's playbook has shown that getting the experience right first often beats being cheapest. If you accept that, then Vision Pro's role in igniting the era is almost inevitable. It created a reference design for what a spatial computer should feel like. And once you have a reference, others iterate faster.
So why does this matter beyond tech circles? Spatial computing changes the grammar of interaction. Screens run on a rectangular logic, rows, columns, windows, that evolved from paper and television. Spatial interfaces introduce scale, depth, and proximity as primitive design variables. That changes workflows. Imagine doctors overlaying patient scans on a body during surgery, architects walking through designs at full scale, or remote teams collaborating in virtual spaces where gestures and line of sight matter. It's not magic, it's a change in affordances. For businesses and creatives, that's a new toolkit. For consumers, it's a new way to blend reality and digital content that could make our devices feel more like tools and less like distractions.
And culturally, the ignition prompts questions about presence and attention. As tech becomes spatial, the design choices we make now, privacy defaults, etiquette norms for wearing headsets, standards for when digital content can appear in shared spaces, will shape everyday life. Apple's influence means these choices get debated on a large stage. That's a good thing, because a mainstream rollout invites scrutiny and regulation sooner rather than later. If spatial computing arrives with thoughtful guardrails, it can avoid some of the missteps earlier platforms made.
So in a nutshell, Vision Pro ignited the era not because it invented everything in the headset, but because it packaged a system, hardware, OS, developer economy, and a believable set of use cases, and delivered it with the design and marketing heft that makes an industry take notice. The result was a reboot of interest, investment, and imagination in spatial apps and headsets. The long story of head-mounted tech moved from lots of isolated experiments to a coordinated narrative about what a mainstream spatial computer could be.
And the takeaway? The Vision Pro era teaches us that platforms don't just need great tech. They need storytellers, marketplaces, and a sense of everyday practicality. Apple provided those elements, and in doing so, gave the spatial computing movement a runway. Whether we ultimately wear screens on our faces, on our wrists, or via contact lenses, is still up for debate. But Apple's move shifted the debate from if to how, and that's the ignition moment.
If you enjoyed this origin story and want more micro-histories of everyday tech that shaped the world, like, subscribe, and share with a friend. What if the world's next personal computer didn't sit on your desk? It sat on your face.